We are back, Warp and Woof Radio at RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. And you cannot miss us today because we have a special guest coming in from IUPUI. Last week we had our marvelous guest, Tom Foltz, the great mathematician from IUPUI and a number of other places actually. But Tom was a great guest last week, talked about the issue of a designed universe and the emphasis, of course, that we have as Christians about such things. We're grateful for Tom's presence here this last week. This week, with another prof from IUPUI, he goes in a different direction as it relates to his teaching and his emphasis there at IUPUI. Larry Smith is actually going on this particular week, and our focus, of course, with him is going to be on leadership because he is from the Tobias Leadership Center on the campus of IUPUI. And a wonderful opportunity to have Larry with us here today. My co-host, Dr. Clyde Posley, will be joining us soon. And when he does, we'll start our discussion, establishing a biblical base of leadership from a Christian point of view. But before then, let me give you just kind of a highlight of what we do here at Comenius Institute, and specifically our focus on this particular radio show. So at Comenius, we cross three bridges. The first bridge that we cross is at college at IUPUI. I work with students and faculty there at IUPUI, helping them to understand their studies, the students from a Christian point of view, always trying to connect with faculty to find out, to understand, to engage different kinds of ideas, I think, that might be helpful for all of us, certainly across the board in our culture. So that's what we do at IUPUI, Comenius at college. Then there's Comenius in the community. So in the community, we do something like this radio show, for instance. Our radio show comes to you every Wednesday from 10 until noon. And we focus on Christians that are doing good around Indianapolis. It's based on those commands from Titus chapter 3, do good, do good, do good. And our focus there, of course, is always the same. And that is we're looking for folks in and around Indianapolis who are engaged in whatever it is that they might be engaged in socially. Some kind of social contacts, whatever the case might be, and the kinds of things that they do around Indianapolis that is doing good. Now, of course, our focal point is always to find those folks. But in case you run across somebody that you think ought to be on this particular program, you holler at me. Just shoot me an email at Eckel, that's my last name, 1957 at Gmail, or shoot me a message, personal message at Facebook, or I'm all over social media. You can find me anywhere, LinkedIn, Twitter. Go to our websites, warpandwoof.org, that's WARPANDWOOF.org, or ComeniusInstitute.org or .com, and you'll find us there. By the way, just in terms of community and the connection now to our third bridge that we cross into culture, we are engaged in all kinds of different events and cultural connections. And so, for instance, on our websites, ComeniusInstitute.org, .com, and warpandwoof.org, you'll find over 1,000 podcasts, sermons, essays, all kinds of things, video teaching on one thing or another across a broad array of different subject areas and engagements. So do check with us at those particular websites. Those things are accessed easily and freely to anybody and everyone. So we're looking forward to having Larry Smith on in our second hour. And until that time, we're going to take a one-song break. And when we come back, we'll begin our discussion of what does it mean to think Christianly about leadership. We'll be engaging with the Tobias Leadership Center as well. Larry Smith in the second hour, Dr. Clyde Posley joining us shortly. We'll be right back. All right, I'm live in two places. Very scary. Very scary. I've got all kinds of people watching me while we're on commercial break. Our wonderful tech assistant, of course, is always taking out the music from the podcast that comes out later on. But these things are archived, so you get to see everything in between, and there is nothing left out. In fact, there will even be a couple minutes here toward the top of the hour where Dr. Clyde and I leave the premises. Well, not really, but we're going to shift gears and go get a picture taken with Larry Smith, and then we'll be back in these seats again and talk with him about the kinds of work that he does. So for those of you watching live, this is what we're all about. Leadership today, biblical view of leadership, our concern for leadership, across the board. In fact, maybe some of you don't know, but my PhD work was in social science research with a special emphasis on leadership, more specifically, actually, in higher education. So I'm really happy to be invested and involved at IUPUI. And that's part of the mission of Comenius, is to cross that bridge at the college. And so we're grateful for those kinds of things as well. Grateful, of course, to be here at 2131 East 10th Street, right across the street from the Bonner Center. And as I say every week, you can also grab lunch at Burger King. They have great salads. Just ask them to grill you a slab of chicken breast and you're all good. And wonderful stuff to be had there. So I see Dr. Clyde coming across the street here, about to come in our door. Anxious for him to join me here this morning. So this is no longer a one-man show. So here he is coming on in. Good morning, brother.
Good morning. Good morning.
We are live in two places.
Gulliver. Gulliver's Travel. I sat at the exit to get off on 70 for 7 minutes.
Oh, no.
Just now. So in this long line is backed all the way up to the highway now. I don't know that I can't really see what's going on. So the guys are working on the light. So I'm like, how are these people just sitting here and see these guys? You know, they're working on that pole.
Yeah.
So they have the light stopped.
Yeah.
So I go around, back up, go back up Keystone, come back around. They're still sitting at the light.
Oh my
so
word!
Pointing.
They just don't get it, do they? Yeah.
Well, I would think if you sitting at any light for 5 minutes, you start to think, well, maybe the light's not working. Maybe.
Yeah. Right. One of the nice things for everybody watching us live, because we are in the urban core, is that we get to hear sirens every once in a while. Fire trucks, ambulances, all kinds of cool things going by us at some moment.
Across the street too. Keep an eye on that.
Okay. All right.
In the parking lot.
All right. Well, since that's where your car is, I'll especially be concerned.
Yeah. I'm less concerned about the car than what's going on in that car there.
Oh, okay. All right.
Parked out in the middle of the parking lot right there.
Okay. I don't see it through the shrubs.
Yeah.
But, okay.
It's something's happening.
Something's happening. Yeah. All right. Once again, in the urban core, you never know what might be happening. Of course, in the suburbs, you don't know what's happening either. You know, people are sinful everywhere. It doesn't matter where they live.
So what's happening, man?
Well, we got
Radio Land.
Yeah. This is the man right here.
No, I'm the man sitting next to the man. What's his name? Robin Harris is a comedian. I'm the man sitting next to the man.
We got to make a decision about Bonner Center. Did you see that email?
I did. Yeah, I did.
You want to start in October? You want to start in 2 weeks? What do you want to
do? I'm thinking let's start in October.
Okay.
Start in October. Let's give ourselves the time to do the other things we talked about doing.
Yeah. Polly Riddell is watching right now, and Polly is ecstatic to hear that we're going to give ourselves some time to set ourselves up.
Let's set ourselves. Let's because it's anything this important. Should be publicized. It's not a small venture, and so we should treat it like it's and that doesn't take away from what we're doing.
No, not at all.
Preparation is always, as you know.
That's right.
Preparation is always.
Preparation is the marker of victory, right?
Absolutely.
There. That's it.
So let's do that.
And we are back. Warp and Woof Radio, RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. You are now seeing Dr. Clyde Posley, Dr. Mark Eckel here on Facebook Live, and we are here on YouTube Live as well if you're connecting with us there, or later on in the archived event. Podcast will come out later on where our marvelous technician, Josh Collingwood, is going to take care of our tech issues. So Harold H.B. Bell is sitting in the studio here with us. He is the one taking care of all the music. So any kind of musical interludes, you hear HB from the background saying, "You're on." Yes, that means we are on.
Mr. Jumbo Love himself.
That's right, boy. He is the man. Talk about the man. Here it is. I just want to say this for those of you who might be seeing brand new podcasts coming out. So I see podcasts popping up all over the place, and I see podcasts popping up from folks who have had the opportunity to be involved with HB. And what I find is that imitation is the greatest form of flattery, and so
that is often said.
That is often said, and I got to tell you, if you see new podcasts popping up, more likely than not, the folks have been somehow engaged with HB Bell here at 2131 East 10th Street. He has been doing his thing for 7 years, as far as I'm concerned. He's the man at Radio Next. So speaking about leadership, kind of nice segue, because HB is a great leader here in the Indianapolis area. We're talking about leadership here today, actually going to be having Tobias Leadership Center represented by the great Larry Smith. We're looking forward to having him on in the second hour. So Dr. Clyde Posley,
yes, sir.
Antioch Baptist Church, we are here to engage this marvelous question of leadership. How do you, from your vantage point, when you think about leadership, how do you engage it from your viewpoint? What are the first things that you want to talk about? What are the foundation stones to this?
The origin of the leader. Anyone can choose to place the title of leadership on themselves. Just in as much as people can place a title of leadership on people.
Yes.
But leaders have to come from God. And we throw the term around, Dr. Echo, such and such is a born leader. I don't know how much that really means or how true it is, because just like we were born males, we weren't born men, we were born males. We have to learn to become men. And in the same way, we have to be careful with this. Such and such is a born leader. No, any good leader, any good leader of character and integrity and godliness has the hand of God on them. And that's what caused that. Through a series of difficulties, ups, downs, trials, lessons. Yeah. Jesus, and I'm teaching through the Sermon on the Mount in Bible study. Okay. And Jesus, the Bible says in the 5th chapter of the book of Matthew, when Jesus had gone into a mountain, and when he was set, he opened his mouth and taught them, saying. So he first calls 12 disciples and then teaches them. Yeah, it's called a Sermon on the Mount, but it's actually a lesson on the Mount. Yeah. And he teaches these leaders. This is important because God in Christ called 12 leaders and did not unleash them for 3 years until he could teach them, show them by precept and example. Yes. So, in a more direct conclusion to my answer to your question, leadership must be given to us by God. It is a grace that comes from God.
Wow. I'm thinking of that passage in Numbers chapter 11 where Moses, having seen people invested with the Spirit of God, says, I wish that everybody would have the Spirit of God, that passage in Numbers chapter 11. This issue of leadership is really difficult because, quite frankly, if you are a leader, then you have to have followers. So you just, by the way, those two things kind of go together. If you don't have followers, you're not a leader. Right. And of course, the flip side is true. If you're a leader, then you have followers, and that means that you have to care for the followers. Right. So you can't just treat the followers any way that you want. And to Dr. Clyde's point, the emphasis, of course, that God is the one who makes leaders. So again, First Testament teaching. Actually, the very first time, this is a fascinating little piece of information from Old Testament studies. Very first time that Scripture indicates anybody was filled with the Spirit is in Exodus chapters 29 to 35, which is Bezaleel, who is building the accoutrements to the temple. So here you have somebody working with wood, working with stone, working with fabric, who has been indwelt by the Spirit of God for leadership purposes. That's a fascinating idea. And so just let me punctuate it by saying the first leaders, or the first people, let me say, that were indwelled by the Spirit of God were artists. That's right. Artists, not preachers, not prophets, not priests, artists. I just want to emphasize that because I think that's kind of cool. So you can be a leader in any venture, in any venue, in any vocation. Right. Yeah.
I think that God empowers believers all believers to be leaders. Now I know we're talking about leadership in a different vein, but in it can be said, not to go far away, but that is what the Holy Spirit is trying to do with us, along with our salvation, along with giving us residency in heaven. But he's trying to put us in a position where we can lead people to Christ. And so often, this is important because often people assume that leadership is exemplified only in personas like ours, or a pastor or a professor, or HB, or a president or a senator, a congress, or a politician, or a manager. No. We have a light that should show sign, that should, according to Scripture, so shine that men see our good works and glorify our Father. So Jesus Christ made it clear to those disciples, he intended to make them all fishers of men, and not just because I don't believe he meant just you all. That they would teach all men to be fishers of men. And so in that regard, I think we are all responsible for playing a role of leadership at some level.
It reminds me of when Jesus calls his disciples in John chapter 1, for instance, when he calls those two brothers and they come to follow Jesus, and he says, look, you have an opportunity here to follow me. And the emphasis on following Jesus is a real crucial concern, obviously, for us. That leaders, let's say it this way, leaders, first of all, need to be followers. And from a Christian vantage point, we're talking about the 1 Corinthians 11:1, you follow me as I follow Jesus.
That's right. I think because, and let's talk for a second about why it's so important for leaders to be followers first. Because in the fellowship, which is being a prelude to leadership, you are pruned. And and trust me when I tell you, if I could look in the audience's face, I tell them. And there's a bit of pruning that happens after, even when you become a leader. But in the fellowship, you are shaped. A lot of people who aspire to grand leadership or visible leadership or whatever the case, many of them miss the point that the shaping of such a call happens in obscurity, behind, under the veil of life, in the mountain climb, or in the difficult moments of life. That's when you are being shaped. David was shaped for his great leadership, fooling with smelly sheep, being looked over by his father, kind of disrespected by his brothers. But God was preparing him for a great move, a great plan for him. And so often many, and I tell young preachers this, younger preachers, young people, listen, don't despise humble beginnings. Don't despise the sometimes drudgery that goes with the preparation stage of life. There's a promise coming if you can sit through the preparation.
This is, I'm mindful, just having started at IUPUI teaching a course this week of Apollos in Acts chapter 18, where here's a brilliant man, a brilliant mind, a logician, a philosopher, a theologian, but he needed to have the way of Jesus explained to him more fully by two people in the congregation who many would refer to as laymen today, probably not a great term, but nonetheless, people who are in the pew, as it were. And once he was under their tutelage, he then went out and even further mystified his listeners by the tremendous opportunities that he had to engage his listening audience. You're listening to Warp and Woof Radio at RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. And we come to you from 2131 East 10th Street, right across the street from the Bonner Center. And when we come back from our one-song break, we're going to be re-engaging this issue of a theological, biblical view of leadership. Warp and Woof Radio, we'll be right back.
I see that name there, Beverly Posey Myers. I have a sister named Beverly.
All right.
Of course, spell her name with an L.
We're going to do some shifting here, folks. See if we can get a larger.
I've got to leave a bit early now. Get to the church.
Sure.
There's a couple things you got to do.
Yeah.
And I got to get them done before I start Bible study.
Yeah.
Something I was going to say. Larry Smith. Oh, he writes for the Recorder.
Larry Smith, does he?
I think so.
Okay.
I think if it's the same person, I've never had it.
All right. Okay. Okay. Good.
But I'm also, while I'm on the air, I want to make sure I have a friend in North Carolina.
Okay.
I wanted me to tell you how much he's a pastor.
Okay.
I wanted me to make sure that I said to you how much he's been blessed by our conversation.
Oh, really? Cool.
Yeah. He pastors a church there, and it is quite the racial tensions there, where he is quite are escalating into ways of almost combativeness.
Oh, man.
And seeing us
and
hearing us, he was just saying it's been several times that we've been a great encouragement to him.
Yeah.
At that time, he's a large congregation, and but he's kind of rural. So
okay. All right.
The cultures don't interact a lot there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a sadness always to hear those kinds of things.
We've got to engage.
Yeah.
I tell people, not only do we have to engage, but speaking of engagement, it doesn't mean anything just to talk about it.
Right.
You got to do it. You have to find yourself, engage. And just because of the cultures and because of ignorance, I would say, many people just don't give engagement an opportunity.
Yes.
What if you and I had never talked? The day we met, and now we know that HB was instrumental.
You're okay, man.
Yeah, I keep one in the car. I do it all the time.
Do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
What if we had talked? What if they hadn't invited you? Let's
start there. Yeah.
What if the Red Alliance, which at that time was suggested by was led by two black women.
Yeah.
What if they choose not to invite you because you're white? And then what if I don't come to you or you don't talk to me?
Right.
I wasn't just me coming to you. We talked.
We talked.
These things are important, and it can be said. Well, we keep bringing up black and white. Look, the issue of black and white is out there. What we have to do is to make sure that we don't let it swallow up what God is trying to do. That's the driving force behind our show. We want theology to be preeminent in everything we say, and I think that's why the show works.
Yeah. Well, it's distinctive that way. It's unique. Nobody else is doing something like this, which is what you talk about all the time. Well, honestly, unless you're a theologian, you can't do it this way. Honestly, and then if there's no
in front of people, that's a big deal. That's a major statement.
There's you need some kind of scholarship. You need some kind of erudition.
That is,
book learning, as it were.
Now, someone could hear that and then think we're saying we're better. We're not saying that we're better.
No.
We are saying that for you to have grounded, anchored, healthy epistemological conversations about theology that are rooted, like you said, that are rooted in Scripture, you must have some kind of training.
Okay.
You just walk off the street, and in fact, that's what's wrong now. You got people engaging, and the information is not rooted in,
in any kind of
sourcing. You're not reading.
Yeah.
They're not using more for the Bible.
And we are back, Warp and Woof Radio, RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site, right across the street from the Bonner Center, 2131 East 10th Street. Dr. Clyde Posley, Dr. Mark Eckel here, engaging with you about this particular issue of leadership. We were just talking off air about the necessity of training in leadership, and I think, Dr. Posley, that might be not a bad way to begin this segment, because let's take it from any other vocation standpoint. If you're going to be a bricklayer, if you're going to be a house builder, if you're going to be a plumber, if you're going to be a lawyer, pick a vocation, it doesn't matter. Guess what you have to do? You have to go learn something.
Absolutely.
So there has to be some substance to whatever it is that you are engaged with. And so for Dr. Posley and I, the issue is always going to be one of theology. We're going to approach this because we are biblically based from a biblical vantage point. Make no apology for that.
Right.
We know that those who might see us or hear us see things from a different point of view. That's great. We truly understand that.
And invite the conversation.
Indeed, we do. But the issue of training, the issue of learning is huge for us. And so when we say the kinds of things that we say about the necessity of that, this is not something that we take in a small way, but it's very important to us.
Right, right. I'm thankful that we're not left, that God has not left us to ourselves trying to figure out the world without Scripture.
Yes.
Without the Holy Spirit, without the power of revelation, which is God's greatest gift.
That's right.
To humanity.
That's right.
Understanding, revelation, truth. And so, I was thinking as you were talking, Dr. Echo, where would we be, the both of us, with these yearnings to know, or these desires to want to see cultures and people come together without some knowledge of Scripture? Yes. Some grounded, some root, some place to anchor truth.
Yes.
Because as we were saying off air, we believe our world suffers to some degree from people trying to have these conversations just out of their passion, or just out of anger, or just out of emotion, or just out of hatred.
Yes.
Or, or just out of personal experience.
Yeah.
That you can't. That's dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's dangerous.
This reminds me of something, everybody. For those of you on Facebook, I don't know if I put it up on Twitter or not, but I linked you on this, by the way, this morning. There was a great piece from Cornel West on the issue of leadership, but more specifically, he was interested in his connection to his friend Robert P. George. Now, Cornel West is, as we've, I think, mentioned before, from a liberal vantage point, socio-political vantage point, his friend Robert P. George is conservative. And so you have a black man and a white man, both of them who are PhDs, both who are professors, very similar to what's going on right here, by the way. And what I did was I linked all kinds of different folks, in fact, some of my colleagues at IUPUI, and I said, look, this is what we want to do. The kind of thing that Cornel West said this morning, or in this particular interview that I posted this morning, was fantastic. It was wonderful to emphasize that the university is important. The idea that we need to hear different voices within the university is important, that you don't shut somebody down just because they don't believe the same thing you do. Man, that is tremendously helpful. And so it's the very thing that Dr. Clyde and I are doing here in Indianapolis. We're basically saying to everybody with optics, look, here's a black and a white man sitting next to each other, PhDs, love each other, care for each other, and care about the issue of bridging cultures. So I think that's a really powerful statement.
Yeah, and not only is it powerful, politically, socio-politically, and all of that, but isn't that a democracy?
Yeah.
Isn't that what's supposed to be happening? Yeah. That we are, total agreement, in my view, is a danger to a true democracy. We need opinions.
Yeah.
We need people to bring their presuppositions so that we can challenge each other, and because all thought should be challenged, except God's, of course. But all human thought should be challenged because we're flawed, and none of us have all the information.
That's right.
And so we should have debate and conversation. What Dr. West is doing is a great example. Dr. West and
Robert P. George.
Robert P. George is a great example of what, in my opinion, well, not just our show or their collaboration, or even America, but the world should be that we are better when we bring our gifts as leaders together to challenge one another. And intelligent men can challenge without arguing. Intelligent women, because some of the greatest philosophers that I know are women. So intelligent people can debate, can listen, can grapple, and then have lunch.
And then
You know,
and then have lunch.
It's okay. And then we can sit down and we can have dinner. You know, because, and it's important. I love to be around people that have opinions rooted in something. I have to agree.
Yeah.
You said that. I have to agree.
Yeah.
It can be far-fetched, but let's talk.
Yeah, absolutely. Just for the sake of everybody seeing us, watching us, hearing us, by the way, we don't agree about everything, and that's okay.
That's okay.
That's okay. We have good conversations about good things. By the way, just as a side note, and maybe I shouldn't have said that. That's kind of a sad thing to say. As a preeminent concern, of course, as Dr. Clyde brings this up, is a concern about women in leadership. And I'm mindful of the fact that I should mention my wife's favorite leader, woman leader in First Testament, who is Huldah, who is, by the way, when they brought her the Word of God, when the Word of God was silent for so many years because nobody had it in their possession, and then it was found in the temple, and they bring it to somebody saying, you know, who are we going to get to interpret this for us? They found a hermeneutics prof in Huldah. I find that very fascinating. And here's a woman who's basically saying to the rest of the patriarchal society, hey, look, I'll explain things to you if you want to know.
Right.
This is where this is coming from.
Right.
So to our colleagues everywhere who are women, we esteem you, highlight what you do, are privileged to stand alongside you in the tasks that we've been called to. When we think about the issue of leadership, let's take this a little bit further and really think about what does leadership mean from a Christian vantage point within the culture in which we live. Because as you and I both know, we live in a pluralistic culture where we have lots of different points of view. It's not just between you and I. It's not black and white only, not conservative liberal only. We're talking about cultures. I mean, huge differences here. How do we begin to think differently as Christians within the framework of the question, what does leadership look like from a Christian vantage point when you're in cultures that are different from your own?
That's a task.
Yeah,
that's a task. There has to be. I don't really like the word tolerance.
No, I agree.
I don't
I'm right there with you.
But there has to be an acceptance. It's hard to disrespect people's culture and then have unity with them.
Yes.
You know, whether it be what Native American culture or Hindu culture, you know, or any of, not necessarily Native American, but any of the 5 major quote unquote religions. We have to accept that our approach to world citizenship or global citizenship may be different than other people's approach. But if we're not careful, if we look closer, we might find that they're trying to accomplish the same thing we are.
Yes,
you know,
that's right.
And often we ostracize people because of the methods the cultures have produced, sometimes without considering that their methods may be just a different way of doing what we're trying to do.
Yeah. It reminds me of what C.S. Lewis called in The Abolition of Man, the Tao. And he said, there's a common ethic that's across cultures. And it's a universal because God has embedded these universal principles within the culture. Whether or not you agree to whether or not God has embedded these things or not, nonetheless, they are still there. So for my colleagues who are perhaps of a different persuasion, perhaps more of a humanistic or perspective and that kind of thing. Nonetheless, we can still agree in terms of the work that we do because we agree to these universal principles. And that's a crucial concern.
When King discussed the universality of man and what he called the Negro problem, one of the things he was trying to get over was that any problem in any culture, because sin is relevant to all cultures, requires the help of other cultures.
That's right.
So if there's a problem in the Asian culture, and they are in America, or there's an American problem in Asia, then it's going to require the help of all surrounding cultures, because there's no problem that can exist that other cultures can say they can't understand because of the universality of sin. You know, and so what we must find ourselves doing is being available as if we're truly leaders, if our cultures will serve as leadership and examples to other cultures within a society. We must find ourselves available and cognizant, and dare I say compassionate, to the plight of other cultures. You know, because we're talking about individual leadership by and large, you know, for the most part here, but cultures should serve as leaders.
Yes.
As models.
That's right.
Yeah.
What I'm thinking about as you're talking about these things, your good comments about the differences of cultures and yet the similarities of them, you know, here's a real practical example. I'm just a practical guy, so you know, here's what I have to say about this. We had in our subdivision here recently some road work being done, and
where you live,
where we live, and so you know, I'm waiting for these guys to finish this road work, and they've left these huge bumps to go over, so everybody's slowing down and all of these kind of. And you know, I'm sure I'm like most everybody else in the subdivision who says, well, can't you guys finish this project? What's your problem anyway? As you're talking about this, I'm recognizing my own sinfulness in the sense that, you know, my desire for them to complete this project within the framework of what I think ought to happen right now. And so even within the concept or context of cultures, let's say, for instance, within a workplace, I don't understand all of the things that a leader has to deal with or an administration has to deal with. And so I'm here trying to deal with my thing, but you know, I might be upset with somebody else because they, from my vantage point, they're not doing their job.
That's not uncommon. I believe if the listeners would acknowledge, we've all had a bit of that. That's a great analogy. That's a great analogy. 69 to get to where I live, I have to go up there. 69, and they had at night they block it off, you know, and I'm all distracted, you know, why now? Okay, but they're smoothing the bumps. They're patching holes. Now I've had to replace several rims this season. All right, you know, as many people have. And now which is it?
Which
do you want to buy more wheels?
Yeah.
Or do you want them to take the time? Or are you willing to be inconvenienced for a moment for a better ride for everyone? Yeah,
that's right. So when we think about a leadership, you know, we're not talking about highfalutin, ethereal concepts that are above everybody's head. We're always interested in putting the cookies in the bottom shelf here. So when we talk about issues such as this, we want everybody to understand, hey, leadership happens at every juncture.
And we're all being shaped. You know, you don't get to a place. Humans don't get to a place where you are a leader and now you are just there. You know, everything's right. We're all still learning, evolving into the leader that God, if we're children of God, evolving to the leaders God wants us to become. It's a process.
It is a process. And that reminds us of the theological concept of sanctification. There's such a thing as progressive sanctification. That is that we are becoming more and more like him who we serve. And that's a crucial concern for this. Right. So back to the question as it relates to culture and as it relates to leadership and a Christian view of these things, because we're concerned about that. Let me just give one example and, you know, just jump in at any juncture. Like you know, you've mentioned that you have sons and daughters in the ministry and the marvel of what you've been able to do in terms of discipleship. And over the years, of course, as a teacher, I've had, you know, how many students, I don't know. But just to give one example of this, one of my students who was one of the most recalcitrant, upsetting people in my classes in all of my history of teaching, constantly an irritant, has since that time become a believer, is now mayor of his city, and is now having a tremendous impact in his culture. Why is that? Because there's been a change within him, his person, to become, as you said earlier, more compassionate, more understanding. I mean, even something as simple and as silly as the fact that they had these, you know, some kind of open days in his city where everybody's celebrating the city and so on. And he went to the dunk tank. And he said on social media, he said, Now, if anybody has any outstanding grievances, I'll be at the dunk tank if you want to take them out on me. You know, you're using humor to get the point across that, hey, you know what? I'm just like you. I'm fallible, flawed, all of those kinds of things. But there is a true leader, somebody who sees the community in which he lives, serves it with compassion.
Right. You know, the scripture points out that many of the faith leaders of that we would what's called in the Faith Hall of Fame in the book of Hebrews had similar beginnings to what you just described from your student about your student. Moses had been a mess. David had been a mess. Elijah struggled with depression and emotional issues. And I will just say this: when I first went to Bible college, the president of the university, he couldn't stand me.
Oh,
I could not shut up.
oh,
I could not shut up, and was just ignorant I was excited about Jesus. I mean, I'm excited about telling the world I know Jesus. I wanted to know Jesus, but I was just as ignorant, and I just and so one of my professors pulled me to the side, Dr. Eccles, said, "Listen, I want," and he's gone on to glory. His name is Dr. Stacy R. Shields. He said, "Listen, you are a really smart fella, but you are just as stupid as they come."
I'm sorry. I didn't expect that. I'm sorry.
He said that I said, "What do you mean stupid?" He said, "I meant what I said in both instances. I think you are really smart, but you need to learn to listen before your passion destroys you." He said, "If you give us 4 years to teach you what you really want to know, that you think you can learn by being disruptive," and I really wasn't being disruptive in the sense of trying to mess up the class. I was just didn't know how to be a student. You're excited about it. Yeah, I didn't know how to be a student. So he taught me, and I say today that my passion for education and learning and listening, I had to be taught. I had to be taught to be slow to speak and quick to hear.
And that was a relational learning that you were
exactly. A leader came to me and sat me down. He thought enough of me. He loved me, and he told me, "Listen, this is a crossroads for you, son." And he told me that he saw himself in me, because he said, passion untamed is destructive.
Yeah. That's reminds me of Proverbs 19:2 that talks about the necessity of passion along with discernment. Those two things have to go together.
Absolutely.
Yeah. This idea that somehow we bear responsibility for relational growth. Let's mention this, by the way. This is a very important issue. In Luke chapter 10, where there's a listing of Jesus' apostles, and they're given their due in that particular passage. There's a very interesting phrase in English that says they were with Jesus. Now, leadership isn't something you just learn from books. I mean, I got a ton of leadership books, like I'm sure you do, on your shelves. But you don't just learn leadership by reading books.
Right.
You learn by being with somebody else.
Absolutely.
Relationship.
It'd take us a whole show to talk about.
That's right.
I think that's one of the missing links, in what's the word I want? Proper leadership, ecclesiastical succession in churches.
Yeah.
Because we have so many younger preachers who just believe that they can do well because they can preach, or because people are saying amen at a few of the things they're saying. And that doesn't mean that first of all, what you're saying is correct. Right. But secondly, pastoring or church leadership is less about excitement and more about a discipline to principles that the leader continues to practice.
And let's flip that around to your good point and say the other, and that is that some pastors hang on way too long.
Way too long.
Way too long.
Way too long, and they don't. And they don't, and often, more often than not, I don't know every situation, obviously, but more often than not, it's fear of their future and the fear of unknown. And I want you to say, if you don't mind, here's a good spot for you to say that, talk about legacy.
Ah, okay.
Because a lot of pastors don't get that. they don't know that they're really shaping their legacy.
Right.
To let the Holy Spirit lead there.
You know, just to make that point, whenever you talk on the radio about the things that you've learned, invariably 2 or 3 times during any given episode, you talk about people who have influenced your life.
Absolutely.
These people have left their mark, their image on you. And so what I say to people all the time is that legacy is not just what you leave behind, it's who you leave behind. Right. The crucial concern of this relational commitment and connection with people and individuals.
Absolutely.
We just got a couple of minutes here left in this particular hour before Larry Smith comes in from the Tobias Leadership Center at IUPUI. Final thoughts as you think about leadership here in this first segment, a Christian view of leadership, a biblical rootedness in leadership.
You know, this is such a topic. I can't remember this author, this book called The Dark Side of Leadership. I read this book that I read 7 years ago. But you know, leadership, God can do so much with so little if we give him an opportunity. You know, to any would-be leader out there, or younger preachers, or younger future teachers, or future professors, Dr. Eckel just hit it on the head. Find you someone. You know, Hebrews 6 and 12 says, "Follow those who through faith and patience have inherited the promises." Find you someone to mimic, to follow, to glean from, and it's going to seem like it's long, and you may not even always agree with the person that you're following. Dr. Troy Ladd, who I sat under, he actually paid my way through seminary.
Oh wow!
For my former church, the Little Bethel Baptist Church.
Oh, good for him.
That's the church Sherman Radford pastors.
Oh, that's cool. Nice.
Yes. He told me, son, when I first came to that church, he said, son, you're going to learn just as much to do as a future leader as you will learn what not to do. But listen and watch for it all. Because without, you know, I'm not here to show you my perfection to get you to leadership. I'm here to show you what leadership looks like, so you can bounce it against what you know and what you're learning against what you're seeing. Man, Dr. Troy Ladd was just, it was just awesome. It was awesome for me. And again, I owe a great gratitude, yes, to God, but his use of people.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. The emphasis that we have on people is huge for us. We're really consumed by who we have been given an opportunity to be with, and that's really a crucial issue.
And he has so blessed us with people, you know, Mark, that who he shaped so that they would have empathy and sympathy and compassion and commitment to us. Because without that, man, I wouldn't be sitting here. Yeah, and I mean that.
Yeah. Just a quick comment. We don't really say much about money, but let me just say something about money. What you just heard Dr. Clyde Posley say about a church paid for him to go to seminary.
Absolutely.
How many more churches would I love to be able to say on air, wow, that church paid for that person. They were foresightful enough to say they see something in that person. They want to take care of those expenses so they don't have to worry about them. They can get the most out of their schooling. What a wonder that would be if more churches would be more considerate of that kind of thinking.
That's right.
We are coming toward the top of our hour. We're going to be taking a 2-song break here in just a second. We are going to be joined here in studio by Larry Smith from the Tobias Leadership Center at IUPUI. We're just thrilled that he's able to be with us here today. But before we leave, we just want to say again how important it is for you to be with us. Thank you for joining us today. At Warp and Woof Radio, we truly believe in bridging cultures. That's what we're here to do. Our emphasis is always to say to Indianapolis and to the world that there is a better way to live life, and that is based on Titus chapter 3, that we might, as Christians, do good, do good, do good, and attract people to the gospel because of that. You're listening to Warp and Woof Radio at RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. We'll be right back. For those of you watching us live, we'll be right back physically in just a moment. Brother, thank you so much for being called. Dr. Clyde Posley.
Nice to meet you. My pleasure, man. I thought so. It's our first time meeting. I just caught the name. I've been putting a few articles in there, so about that. Sorry, my writing has been embarrassing.
Oh, not at all.
Thank you so much for that. And I hate that I'm going to have to leave now that I'm a pastor up there. Some things I've got to handle before. I ain't going to miss you. I'm going to go out with you.
Okay, let's get that.
So it's going to look like I was here.
Yeah, we're here, bro. Yeah, right.
Good to have you, man. Bless your work, man. I looked you up, man. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I mean, which church? The Antioch Church.
Okay, yeah.
The one that has the moving fences on the outside. So I'm gonna put it up next week, and then I'll tear it down the next week. Yeah,
So I'm in New Direction.
That's my
guy. Oh, okay.
I know his father. Okay. I think I've only met him just some meetings. But I know his father. Good ministry.
Very sort of community based.
You can tell by how the church is built, what the intentions of the church are. Yeah.
So you take it off now?
Yeah. Right there. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Call me.
After
3 after 4 today, we can talk. At 2 o'clock, right after Bible study. About 4 o'clock. Yeah.
Do you want me to send an email to say yes?
Yeah. Tell her, but also tell her that we're gonna start in October.
Got it. It's sight unseen in that one room. I haven't seen that room.
So what is she? What is it? We got back in. So.
How long have you been with the Tobias Center?
2 years. And I also ran up the program from 2010.
Awesome. I had a limo business from 2008 to like 2004, and I was actually over there when Randall was there.
Oh yeah,
and
nice guy.
Yeah, super nice guy. We, in charge of them and all the board of directors and all of their key people. So he was talking to me back in like '94, talking about building this foundation and what it was going to lead to, and I've just been following it along and saying, this is so necessary.
I got called out on some church business. So it'll be Larry and I here in studio and archived later on for those of you who are listening later on or watching later on. Both of these, Facebook Live and YouTube Live, are archived. We are live.
Okay.
YouTube and Facebook. So yeah, bring yourself right around over here. Yeah, right around over here. There we go. So this is Larry Smith from the Tobias Leadership Center, and we're thrilled to have him here today. It was really nice for you, by the way, to do this. Man, you sound so busy. You're putting hither and yon. Wow.
I have just returned from Washington, D.C. yesterday, and
wow.
Just travel all over. So it's a busy but fun life.
So, and I know we'll get into this some when we actually start the process of questioning and all that kind of stuff. HB will give us heads up when that happens. Okay. But just tell me a little bit about what does it mean to be a managing director?
So I'm responsible for all of the day-to-day activities of the Tobias Leadership Center, whether it's recruiting fellows. I'm a former fellow myself. I'm an alum from the class of 2010. ensuring that we complete our strategic plan, making sure that our fellows are at their venues where we're supposed to be. So setting all that up, getting the speakers, paying the speakers, ensuring that the curriculum meets the objectives that we set out. And so it's really everything from soup to nuts.
So just so I understand, just from the financial end of things, is Tobias subsidized through the university?
It is not. We have two sources of income. One is the very generous gift from Ambassador Tobias, and the second is there's a fee to participate in the Fellows Program. And so every now and then we'll have a conference that'll make money, and that also goes into the pot. But annually speaking, there are two sources of income.
Okay. I'm just going to run this by you. That's probably not something I'll say on air necessarily, though we are on air. Okay. So I guess I contradicted myself there. Boy, my word. Mics don't even get started, right? Oh, my word. So Dr. Posley and I are thinking about doing an educational process here in town. In fact, right across the street at the Bonner Center.
Great organization over there.
It is. So our interest would be actually to provide an educational opportunity for leaders in Indianapolis. So we would be bringing in the latest social science research to share with leadership. It would be an hour long. We're going to call it First Friday Leaders.
Okay.
And it'll be very much of a teaching opportunity. There'll be discussion, answer, question, answer, that kind of thing. It'll be very segmented, 11 to 12. That's it. If you want to come before, you want to come after. It's not networking. It's not, seeing whose organization is bigger. It's literally to find out, hey, what's the latest research out there that's going to impact what we do. Just for the sake of saying it to you, what's your first thought when you hear that? Is that something that Tobias does? Is that something that is more needed? Are you glad to hear it? Don't start, Mark. This is not a good thing.
I always think that there is room for strong, effective leadership programs. We really, really need that, not only in our city, but in our country and even globally. That is not something that we currently do. We're a pretty small, lean shop, and so we try to stay focused. However, in terms of supporting other organizations, we do that as well. So any way that we can support effective leadership programs, happy to do that.
You give us a shout out.
Absolutely. Glad to do that.
Thank you for that. All right. Well, we'll see where that goes. Actually, it's part of, the Comenius Institute is broad, like I suggested when we were in your office. This would really be the third bridge that we cross into culture, where we are interested in helping people within the culture itself have a broader understanding. And that was something, before you even came in, Dr. Posley and I were discussing, and probably something we should pick up on even in the second hour, is what kind of impact do you think that Christians should have in the culture in which they live as leaders? And what does that look like? Are we chapter and verse people? Are we universal principle people? Are we just putting our best foot forward and hoping people see us for who we are? How does that work? I think we should probably interact.
Great question. As Paul said, I became all things to all people to try to save some. And so I love apologetics. Greek word literally means to answer back or to give a defense. But that's me. Not everyone receives that well. They perceive it as arguing, which it can devolve into that. I think the most important thing is Matthew 5. We are to be salt and light. And someone said a long time ago, we Christians are the only Bible that some people will ever read. So irrespective of what we say, is what we do. It is how we conduct ourselves. Striving for perfection. Not, we are not going to be perfect. It's a process. But I do think that we need to be engaged. We are to be, as the Bible says, in the world, but not of the world. Jesus was always engaged with, shall we say, the unsavory characters of his day. And for Christians to say that we should not be is always troubling to me. As one believer said a long time ago, place me a few feet from hell's door, right? I want to keep in contact with people who really, really need to hear the gospel message. At the same time, again, author of Hebrews tells us, don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together. Some people take their Christianity for granted. I don't have to, I'm a bedside Baptist. I don't have to go to church and so on. And I think that is dangerous as well. We need to get together and encourage each other.
Okay. Yeah, you need to pick up on some of this. Do you do some preaching at your church?
A little bit. All right. So I'm at New Direction Church.
Yeah.
Our pastor is Ken Sullivan Jr. We are one church in two locations, 5301 East 38th Street and 7701 East 86th Street.
Very good. And we are back, Warp and Woof Radio, RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. We're pleased to be with you here today. As always, Wednesday from 10 until noon for those of you watching us live, Facebook or YouTube, or picking up the archive footage later on, or for those of you who are going to be listening to the podcast. Dr. Clyde Posley and I were on the first hour discussing the importance of leadership from a biblical, theological, Christian vantage point. In our second hour, we are privileged to have with us Larry Smith from Tobias Leadership Center at IUPUI. Larry, we're really pleased that you're able to be with us here today. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, your church, just kind of your general bio.
Well, I am a Hoosier native, a fifth-generation Hoosier. Been here for 5 generations. I've always lived in Indiana. I went to college in Massachusetts, business school in California. Other than that, I've always lived here. I'm the proud father of 3 children, one of whom is grown, married, celebrating her 4th anniversary at the end of this month. No grandchildren. Then I have an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old at the Oaks Academy, sending them to a wonderful Christian school. I've been at the Tobias Leadership Center now for 2 years as the managing director, but I'm also an alumnus of the program from the cohort of 2010.
And just before we came on live, you were talking about your church. Do give a plug to this church and the places that the church is organized.
Absolutely, I appreciate that. So it's New Direction Church. You can find us at ndcbetterlife.org. We're one church in 2 locations, one on East 38th Street, literally right next to the East 38th Street Library, and our other location, our new location at 86 and Hague Road, right on the corner of 86 and Hague.
Now, the title of your church, New Directions, always makes me wonder, I've got to ask Larry, why did they name it New Directions? So here's your shot.
So it's a great question. So initially it was charity, not New Direction. It was founded by Pastor Sullivan's father, Ken Sullivan Sr. We are now pastored by Ken Sullivan Jr. I've been there a little more than 2 years. And Pastor Sullivan, I don't think I'm giving any secrets away when I say that he's very open about his background, struggle with substance abuse, was saved in a rehab facility in 1999, very open, very transparent about that. God turned his life in a new direction. And so our church is called New Direction.
Excellent. Wow. So for 20 years, he's been clean and sober, and that's a marvelous thing and a marvel to hear. And, quite frankly, when we stop to think about this, and we should probably segue this into leadership, that is that all of us are flawed and fallible and fallen. And we really have the kinds of things that we deal with on a regular basis as leaders sometimes arise out of our past. So how do you think it is for leaders that they benefit, or maybe in some cases don't benefit from the past experiences that they've had? How can it be better for leaders? Can we speak to that issue?
Yeah, I think it's so critically important for leaders to be transparent about their struggles and about the things that they have overcome. There's only one perfect person as far as I'm aware. And so when leaders are transparent, I think that helps other people. I also think it's important for them to share their experiences with others in terms of how they overcame. So we know that you overcame, but how you did it. It is a process. We're saved. We are being saved. We will be saved. And so I think that's critically important.
The issue of example is a huge issue for us. So I'm thinking about that passage in 1 Corinthians 10, 1-11, where Paul says, he tells all these stories, of course, of what happened in First Testament teaching. And he said, all these things happened to you. He says this twice, for your example, as an example for you. Can that not still be true for us even today in our own culture?
I think that it is absolutely true today. And I think that as we have leaders who are open about their faith, and I'm talking about outside of Christendom, outside the church, but people who are people of faith, who are being, Tony Dungy comes to mind. He was here just this past weekend, did a book signing.
Nice.
He and his wife have written a new book. So when you have people like that, it's easy to say, well, of course, he or she is a pastor or a preacher. But when you have people of faith, like, for example, Tony Dungy, who stands up and says, this is who I am, I think it helps with lay people.
Yeah, it really does. And of course, he won a Super Bowl, which is nice too.
That's a small thing.
That's a small thing.
Just a little game.
Just to make sure everybody remembers that the first African American coach to win a Super Bowl, that was a marvel. So when we think about the examples that people have all around us, let's tie that now into Tobias Leadership Center. And here's a question that's kind of been rolling around in my brain ever since we met, and that is, how do you choose the people that you have come to speak to the fellows? Does it depend on the example, their experiences? How do you do that?
That's a great question. So the majority of our speakers are long-standing. They were there long before I got there. We begin with an idea of, as Stephen Covey says, begin with the end in mind, right? One of the 7 habits. So what do we want our fellows to take away? And so we kind of work backwards from there. And so one of our sessions, for example, I don't want to give too much away because I do want people to apply, and we want things to be kind of a surprise. But one session, we go down to St. Meinrad Monastery in southern Indiana, and that is an exceedingly reflective trip. Some of our excursions are very interactive, very physical. This one is very reflective, and we have an opportunity to think about, who am I as a person? Not everyone is a person of faith who goes through the program, certainly. But it does give a chance. We actually talk with the monks, who are very, very open about why they chose this life, a life of poverty, a life of celibacy. They didn't have to do it. No one, tied their arms behind their back to do it. They chose this life. And so we try to think about what is the most well-rounded set of experiences that we can give to our fellows that will help them to become better leaders.
When you think about the people that you're bringing in, and you said that they have long-standing experiences and so on, the kinds of folks that you're looking for, do the people have to agree to some kind of a belief system or anything like that?
Absolutely not. We want people who come from all faith backgrounds or no faith background. And again, I want to be clear, Tobias Leadership Center is not a faith-based organization. Right. I want to be clear about that. I happen to be a person of faith, but I will say that, and I don't have permission to say the names, but I will say that some of our leaders are Christians who present to our fellows.
Yes. And this isn't to press a point, of course, to our audience and to our listeners because, of course, Dr. Posley and I give no apology for where we stand or who we are. And we're not suggesting anything by that. We're just suggesting, by the opening question, how do Christians engage in a culture that is not necessarily their own? And obviously, within a pluralistic culture, of course, that we live in, we have to navigate all kinds of different engagements. I think that's really a powerful way to go about doing this. And the fact that, you're a believer, that's the reason why you're here on this show today. But nonetheless, we still bear the responsibility to engage with people who don't believe or think like us.
Indeed.
Yeah. So this morning, just to kind of set the stage for this next question, I ran across a very interesting interview with Cornel West, and it was fantastic. I loved it. I don't always agree with Cornel West. That's fine. Dr. Posley and I don't always agree. That's fine. But he said some really cool things about his relationship with Robert P. George, who's a white conservative Princeton professor. They're famous, long-standing friends from years ago. When you think about a black man and a white man who had the same degrees, and who also, by the way, have the same passion, that is, that people be open and listen to each other, how do you think that fits into the framework of helping your fellows in a leadership program to expand their listening abilities to other cultures?
I think it's a great question. As a believer, I don't think it's an accident that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. We should listen at least twice as much as we speak, and really listen to each other. Listen to understand, not merely to respond. And it's so easy to do that. As you know, as everyone knows, our culture today really suffers from, I think, a lack of genuine empathy and understanding and desire to communicate, as opposed to just get my point across. So I think that is critically important. You need to do that across political lines, across racial lines, across religious lines. And if we do that, and again, at the end of the day, we don't always have to agree, and that's okay. I think, unfortunately, sometimes, I think this is on the right and the left, that if you do not agree with me, you're a bad, evil person. I think there are certain principles that we all should agree are evil, but it should not be because, Democrat, Republican, conservative, that it is, can we learn from each other? How do we live in a pluralistic society and advance if we refuse to listen to each other?
One of the things that happened a couple of weeks ago on this show was that Dr. Posley and I spent 2 hours face-to-face talking about politics. And he's a progressive liberal Christian. I'm a perennial conservative Christian. So you have these two different points of view. And these are the kinds of comments that we were hearing afterwards. Folks were saying, we couldn't believe you weren't yelling at each other. And, as I might chuckle about that, I'm also saddened by it because that's exactly the kind of culture in which we live. So to your point and to the issue of leadership and Tobias and what you do there, how do we overcome this idea that somehow my way of thinking has to be right? Do we need more fellows programs? Do we need the kinds of services that a Tobias Leadership Center can provide? I know what the answer is to that, of course. But beyond that, what can we do to continue to expand these opportunities?
I think there are a couple of things, and certainly, yes, it's something the Tobias Leadership Center is very interested in. I think there's a macro answer and a micro answer, and I'll start with the micro answer. It really begins with, like you and Dr. Posley, for example, sitting down with a core set of beliefs, the same text, not always agreeing about it, but just having a heart of Christ to sit down and as the Bible says, come and reason together. On a macro level, I think it is, whether it is through the media, social media, Facebook, YouTube, and so on, but also through our institutions, our churches, synagogues, mosques, whatever, get together, talk about our issues in a way that says we're not going to agree about this text in all its implications, but at least we can come and talk with each other and ensure that each of our viewpoints are heard, that we don't always have to take up arms, that we don't always have to yell at each other. Our children are looking at us and they will learn from us, irrespective of whether we intend them to do. They will listen to what we say, but they will develop in terms of what we do, the example that we show them. So whatever I say to my children, it's, sometimes it feels in one ear and out the other, but they will certainly observe how I treat other people.
This is something you said off air just before we started, as you talked about how important it was to live this before others. And I'm mindful of that passage in 2 Corinthians 3:2, where Paul said that you are epistles known and read of all men. I think today he would say your emails known and read of all men, that kind of thing.
Maybe text messages.
Text messages, that too. Yeah, Snapchat, pick a social media site. You've been listening to Larry Smith from the Tobias Leadership Center at IUPUI. We're privileged to have him on the show and the program today. Some of you might be picking us up later on the podcast, and we're glad to have you there. Actually, about 1,000 people either view or listen to the podcast and the live archived footage that we have in front of you here today. I think that's a tremendous statement to the folks in and around Indianapolis who really care about the kinds of things that we care about. You're listening to Warp and Woof Radio, RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. We're going to be taking a one-song break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking more about the Fellows Program at the Tobias Leadership Center at IUPUI with Larry Smith. We'll be right back. So thank you.
Sure.
Yeah. So in DC, what were you doing? Were you looking for?
Always on the prowl for more fellows, but specifically, so one of our fellows from last year, Ellie Rubenstein, her dad is David Rubenstein, billionaire hedge fund manager, had a party. She was also in a dual IU Purdue graduate program. And so he threw a party for all of the graduates at the National Archives, a private party. Wow. And when you go in there and you see the founding documents of the country, I'd been there once before years ago, but it's a breathtaking experience. And you have one of the original copies of the Magna Carta. I forgot the Declaration. I mean, it's just unbelievable. So we have the director of the archives there as well. So I got a chance to meet some wonderful people.
This is marvelous. You have a great job, man.
Yeah, I do indeed. I am blessed.
Yeah, that's really great. You get to run around the country and meet people and go to billionaire parties. And
That's really cool.
Yes, you know, and to have those opportunities, it's really interesting for a kid who grew up at 34th and Emerson. And that's something I'll never forget. In fact, I own the house that I grew up in.
Oh, cool.
I rented out, but I still have that connection to the neighborhood that I grew up in.
That's marvelous and good. Yeah, so you told me when we were together, whenever that was, I forget, that you were also teaching a class. Is that right?
So I've taught before, so I'm not teaching now.
Not teaching this semester?
But not this semester. I was close, but I decided not to do it because I didn't have enough time to prepare. And I didn't want to cheat the students. But I've taught at Kelly before.
Okay. All right. Is that something you're going to continue to do into the future, do you think?
I'm hopeful that I will. I love being in the classroom, whether it's the Sunday school. I teach Sunday school at church, and or in the academic classroom. I love to teach.
Either one, yeah. So you're teaching undergrad courses?
Undergrad
when
courses,
you do
correct.
that?
Yeah, when I do that.
I'm going to be teaching a course this fall. My pastor's asked me to teach again. This fall, I'll teach on thoughtful Christians and culture. So the very first topic that I'm going to be dealing with is, what does it mean to think?
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah. I don't know if you're familiar with Alan Jacobs.
No.
Alan Jacobs from Baylor University. Just heard him speak at our consortium meeting up in Illinois. Really great literary prof, but really he's an interdisciplinarian. He just wrote a book called How to Think.
Okay.
Which
I'll have to pick that up.
Yeah, honestly, it's one of those books that, you look at and you go, well, this seems like it should be pretty obvious, but it's not. I mean, he brings in stuff that's just foundational, permeation stuff, and it would really, I think, be fun for the fellows even to maybe.
Well, I'm always looking for those recommendations. Always.
Yeah.
Really.
Well, books, man, I'll give you those all day long if you want. So I'd be happy to do that for you. Yeah. So my class just started yesterday.
Yeah, I was going to say, coming over here, and of course, this is the first day I'm in the office this week. So coming back and seeing students everywhere again, the campus is so desolate when the students are not there, and you come back and they're everywhere.
Yes.
And you remember the purpose that you're here. Even though I don't have a lot of direct interaction with them, I love seeing the students on campus.
Yeah. It's a very different, so just for the sake of saying this, taught for 35 years, but always in Christian venues, so Christian school, Christian undergrad, higher ed, PhD, whatever. So this is a brand new experience for me, and it's really good for me to do this for lots of different reasons, not the least of which is to do the very things that we're actually talking about doing right now. And I love to get students to the place where that light bulb goes on, and you see them say, wow, I hadn't thought about that before. That's a way to think about that.
Right. Yeah, I think it's so important. Teaching again, beginning when we're very young, all the way up through graduate school and postgraduate studies. I love being engaged in the life of the mind, and as my pastor says, you're not old till you're cold. So
I like that.
We have to keep learning.
Yeah, that's right. It's a lifelong endeavor, and I'm always concerned that people stop learning. I'm concerned that they should continue to learn.
Indeed.
But you see some people hang it up, and they don't want to think anymore. They think they've gotten a degree or whatever. You see it in professors sometimes, unfortunately, but true. But that's what we're after, getting students to think. This is, for the rest of your life, you're going to be learning, opening up those doors. When we come back in on this next segment, I think it would be fun and important, actually, to talk about some of the people, some of the fellows.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Name names?
Yes, I can. Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
So when I recruit, I actually include several of those names.
Okay.
So people have a sense of who we've had.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so we talk age as well?
Yes. Age, all different, race, gender, all that.
All that. Okay. All right.
Happy to.
Yeah. I think that's important for people to hear this. And once again, that we're really interested in not segmenting, broadening our scope.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And we are back. Warp and Woof Radio, RadioNext.tv at the Cool Groove site. You're listening to us from 2131 East 10th Street, right across the street from the Bonner Center, and we're privileged today to have Larry Smith with us from the Tobias Leadership Center at IUPUI. And he is here to discuss not just leadership, but very specifically his program and the kinds of things that they do there. So for the rest of our time here together, Larry, let's talk about the specifics, maybe some of the details. One of the things that I think would be really interesting, I think, to people is who are actually some of these fellows that are coming in. Kind of give us a broad brushstroke of who they are and where they come from.
It's a great question. So let me, by way of preface, say that Ambassador Tobias spent his entire career in corporate America. He could have said, I only want people from Eli Lilly, Cummins, etc. He didn't do that. He said, I want to have people from the private sector, large and small, nonprofit, faith-based. We've had 4 or 5 clergy members. So the Tobias Fellows Program began in 2006, and it's a cohort of between 15 and 20, if you want to call them executive or senior leaders, every year. Our alums, we have about 200 alums. Among them, we count Jeff Harrison, who heads Citizens Energy. There's Jeff Sparing, who used to run Riley Children's Hospital, now runs Seattle Children's Hospital. Ernest Malone, our current fire chief. Wow. Yeah, I mean, we've had just so many people across the sectors. Currently, we have, for example, Sean Smith, who is the superintendent of Lawrence Township school system.
Wow.
So it's really an impressive group. It's sometimes I wonder, well, how was I admitted back in 2010 when I look at all these wonderful individuals?
Yeah. You know, quite frankly, just as you're talking about this, I'm thinking about the students that I'm teaching at IUPUI and thinking, you know, it might be kind of nice to have a 5-minute commercial break and have you come down and just tell them, hey, this is what we do here.
I would love to do that.
Man, I'm inviting you.
I would
get ready. Stand by on the email, man.
We'll do that. and I also, as I'm going through the names in my head, I realized I didn't mention any women. That was my accident. So please don't email Dr. Ergel with anger about, because this is my family. So Dr. Nikki Woodson, who's also another school superintendent, Rita Wright, who's one of the assistant fire chiefs. She's the person, typically, if there's a major fire or disaster, she's the person who you'll see on TV, the chief spokesperson for the fire department. Lucy Downton, who's a vice president at United Way of Central Indiana. So men and women, so not single gender. I want to be clear about that.
I'm laughing so hard because Dr. Posley and I did exactly the same thing in the first hour.
No hate mail.
No, seriously, and I feel bad about that all the time when I do dumb stuff like that. So for what it's worth, and we were actually talking about Huldah in the First Testament, about she was the only one who could read the text of Scripture and interpret it for the guys,
Absolutely.
Anyway, so for what all of that's worth. So the issue of getting students to engage at their different levels, and I got to be honest with you and say this: I am fascinated by the fact that you are bringing in fellows who are already established in careers. Mm-hmm. Okay, I don't get that. Straight up, man. Yeah. Just tell me what that's about.
That's a great question. And so, yes, most of our fellows have at least a master's degree. We've had MDs, we've had PhDs, but these are folks who believe that there is some area in which they can still develop their leadership skills and abilities. And they can do that in a quote-unquote safe space. So you're in there with people of similar positions. We never pick someone from the same organization because it's kind of the Vegas rule. What happens here stays here. So you don't want to talk about your boss is such and such organization and there's someone else there, or one of your employees, as is likely the case. And so yes, it's not a degree program. I want to emphasize that. The people who we attract, again, in addition to already having typically a graduate degree, although not always, are people who are very, very pressed for time. So they're not looking for a degree program. They don't necessarily have the time to have a degree program. It is rigorous, but it is not rigorous in the academic sense of doing papers, theses, or anything like that. It is really about coming together, understanding what your leadership strengths and weaknesses are. We give them a professional coach, a PhD in organizational psychology, who helps them understand their personal leadership styles and how it fits within the context of their organization.
Wow, that's, honestly, it kind of takes my breath away when you kind of lay it all out like that, and everybody gets a personal coach.
That's really impressive. You said something about this issue of folks who are in the same kind of position. And I'm going back to the question I asked before. I'm going to expand it, broaden it out a little bit more. And you said that they don't have a lot of time. So why? You said that they see themselves as lacking in some area. Are all these areas the same area that they're lacking in?
No, they're not. We actually give them a personality assessment. It's changed over time.
Okay.
When I was in the program, we took something called Insights, which is used by Eli Lilly and other companies. We've done DISC. We now do something called the Hogan assessment. And so this is before they officially join the cohort. You take the Hogan assessment. We have it reviewed. And so once you're in the cohort, you go over your personality traits, and not only yours, but how does it relate to the folks in your cohort, and how do you relate to people in your organization who have the same or different personality? Because sometimes people get along very well with people who have the same personality type. Sometimes you only get along with people who have a different personality type. And so I think that's one of the, I can't speak for every program in the country, but I can say that I've never heard of another program that not only picks people from all of these different industries, but also gives them that coach and that assessment.
Do you think, this just strikes me as I'm listening to you talk about this, do you think that there are people within the organizations that these folks are coming from who are saying to themselves, man, I'm really glad you're doing this because you really need some help?
I think so. That's probably the case. And, you know, so some, certainly most from a developmental standpoint, but others, yeah, we all have blind spots, and they're blind spots because we don't see them.
Yeah.
And there are some organizations that have sent 4, 5, 6, 7 people through the program. Duke Realty, for example, has sent several people. United Way of Central Indiana has sent several people. Eli Lilly and Company has sent several people. And so that is probably the best imprimatur, the best stamp that we have, that organizations continue to send, or at least to nominate people every single year. And that's really something we're proud of.
Do you think that this organization, the Tobias Center, Leadership Center, is in the position that it's at because of its founder and progenitor, the person who has established it, not just with his name, but with funding?
I think that it's absolutely, we are successful in large measure because of Ambassador Tobias, who is just the nicest, and I mean this, I'm not just saying this, a genuinely humble person. He actually, so here was the precipitating event or events that caused him to give the gift. In the early 2000s, as you'll recall, we had all these corporate scandals. Enron, MCI WorldCom, Health South, on and on and on. And he said at this point he was retired, although he did go. He keeps flunking retirement. So after he retired as chairman and CEO of Eli Lilly, he went to go work for the George W. Bush administration, became the head of PEPFAR, President Bush's AIDS initiative in Africa. He also became the head of USAID, so he was in charge of American aid around the world. And so he said, we need to train a different kind of leader. And so ethics is one of the sessions that we have. And, you know, typically at the head of that session, I introduce our speaker for that session. And I always say, well, you know, ethics are important to some people, I guess. And so that's why we send our fellows through an ethics session every year.
Wow. Well, so you're talking about a man who has had this brilliant career, a long-standing career, and behind the scenes, in my thinking, I'm saying to myself, is the reason why he's so humble and nice and generous and so on, is part of that, at least, that he has been invested and involved with so many different cultures?
I think so. He is a truly cosmopolitan person, loves people, welcomes ideas. And you know, again, as a Hoosier, I can say this. I mean, he was born in Indiana, so he has, I think, he was reared with certain values around humility, around being grateful for what you have, and not everyone has that view. Certainly, we are very fortunate that he does.
When you think about leadership, whatever case it might be, if it's civic, if it's religious, if it's educational, if it's business. Let's talk about some of the major characteristics that are really essential, and let's talk about them in the scope of the culture in which we live now. Because, of course, we all know that time and place
time changes, place doesn't, but the people constantly are shifting in their thinking and mindsets, their dispositions and attitudes. So if you were going to say to people, hey, here are the top 2 or the top 5 or whatever, we can broaden these out however you want to go, what kind of characteristics do you think are necessary in leadership in 2018?
I think a few. Certainly, I would say transparency is critically important. I think humility is important. I think that the ability to communicate effectively is important. You know, when you go and you interview for a job or you read a job description, invariably it has ability to communicate. Even apparently, if you're not talking to anybody at all or interacting with people, the ability to communicate. And it always says oral and written, which is always a little frustrating to me because for me, listening should be on that list because I think it is the most important skill regarding communication that we have. We have to listen. If we don't listen, we won't understand.
So you've talked about transparency. So just for those of you who might be watching this, who are my students, you're going to see this piece right here that we just did with Larry Smith, because that's just like this big thing, like shut up and listen. That would be cool. Anyway, so transparency is a big deal. If you were to broaden that out and list other characteristics, other things that you think are important in this culture 2018.
Well, I certainly think empathy is important, and not sympathy. I know sometimes we conflate those terms, but truly being able to understand. So for example, when Jesus finds out that Lazarus is, Jesus wept. The shortest sentence in the entire Bible, Jesus wept. He had empathy. Now, of course, he knew what he was going to do, but that passage always gets to me because it shows his humanity and his humility and his empathy for his friend. And so I think if we don't have empathy, we don't have a lot. I think generosity, not only of financial means, certainly that's important if you have that, but generosity of spirit.
Yes.
Years ago, John C. Maxwell came to Indianapolis. I had a chance to hear him, and he mentioned another leader. I won't say who it is, but this was someone he looked up to, and was a great orator, very intelligent, very wise. But he was at a conference that this person spoke at, and noticed that during the breaks in the conference, the person didn't interact with people. And so he decided John C. Maxwell decided that he was going to be a different kind of leader as he sort of rose to where he is now. And so the ability to interact with people, to have empathy, not to put up barriers, anyone could come to Jesus. And I think that, again, I talked about St. Meinrad, they're Benedictine monks, and their philosophy is treat everyone as if they are Jesus. Treat everyone as if they are the Messiah, because you don't know. The Bible says, we entertain angels unawares. Maybe we're entertaining Christ unawares.
Holly Habib has been in our show. He's actually retired from Lilly, but now has a restaurant on the near Fishers, actually. And it's a marvelous thing, but Ethiopian descent. And whenever I see him and go over to share coffee with him, he says the same thing to me. You may be Jesus in flesh, that.
I've actually been to his restaurant.
Have you?
I didn't know he had been on the show. I was there maybe a year and a half ago. Yes, so I've been there.
Wonderful place, a wonderful person, and boy, talk about hospitality. Oh my word. So, there's a word that honestly, whenever we hear the word hospitality, we really don't think about it in terms of anything outside of dinner. We think of hospitality in terms of there has to be food on the table and I'm going to be eating something. Let's talk about hospitality in terms of inviting people into our space and place of thinking, of work, of community. How important is that within the Tobias Leadership Center?
I think that it's incredibly important. And so we have sessions, opportunities for the fellows just to get to know each other, to become friends. And we can kind of tell after about the second session whether the cohort is really gelled. In fact, this cohort is interesting this year. We knew that they had bonded from the first session because they were already making fun of each other.
There you go.
And so, they had never met, and they were already making fun of each other. But they go out of their way, and in fact, in our alumni network, they many of the cohort, not always, not uniformly, but in many cases, they still get together. Even years later, they'll have dinner, they'll meet for coffee, whether it's one-on-one or in a group setting. I just think it's incredibly important.
and I did a cohort PhD program with 11 other individuals, and I met some of their spouses and children afterwards. And whenever they would talk about, the kids or the spouses would talk about how important it was for them, I'd listen nicely and politely, and then smile and say, I really don't know that you fully understand. I would take a bullet for your husband. I mean, I would step in front of that for him, because that's how much I think of him. Those kinds of experiences in the cohort, and you do not set those aside easily. No, that's marvelous that happens. We talked off air just a moment about somebody who just came to town here this weekend, and I'm judging from what you said that you might have been there.
So it was funny. So Tony Dungy came to town. He went to Lifeway Christian Bookstore. I was not there, but my son's classmates, he goes to the Oaks Academy. They have wonderful school, great parents. One of his friends' mothers took them first to the Lego store.
Oh, there you go, the Lego store.
At Castleton, and then to Lifeway Christian Bookstore. And yes, stood in line to get books signed by Mr. Dungy.
Wise woman, by the way, taking them to the Lego store.
Yes, right. Give them the dessert first.
That's right.
and then took them to the bookstore.
Yeah. So I've read a couple of Tony's books. I wasn't one of them. Quiet Strength was that one of them. Yes. And I'll never forget, reading some of his experiences on the football field and with football players. And for those of you who don't like football, don't watch football, don't hear about football, let me just say, these are big men, and they are, monstrous, muscled people, fantastic people, of course, but nonetheless very large people. So I'll never forget when Tony, in one of his little biographical points in the book, said, when he was introducing himself to his new team, it might have been the Colts, probably did this for everybody. He said, "Now, gentlemen, you're listening to the tone of voice that I will use all the time. I will not yell, and the decibel range will not go higher than this." I'm thinking to myself, how in the world are these huge men, and they're quite vociferous, I'm sure, big voices and so on, he speaks at that kind of level? I mean, what does that say about a leader, of a Tony Dungy kind of caliber?
I think it says a great deal. I'm a parent of 2 young children, one older child, and I'm human, so every now and then someone might say that I yell at my kids. But I always take that as a personal failure. That if I've not done something right, if I have to yell at them, and I think it speaks to just his character. Now, if you listen to him, he'll talk about that he wasn't always that way, but it is really the work of the Holy Spirit in him. And I'll give a quick example that he wouldn't tell, but I heard Warren Sapp tell in an interview when his son, when Tony Dungy's son passed away. Warren Sapp was among the men, his former players, who went to go and console Tony Dungy, but Tony Dungy ended up consoling Warren Sapp. He's, if you know who Warren Sapp is, this is a large individual. He collapsed in Tony's arms, and Tony is consoling him as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah. That was, we won't go into the details of that particular episode in Tony's life, but certainly one that was, that no one wants to engage personally if it can be helped. And, but then to hear that kind of story, and Sapp and so many of other of his players, I mean, they just tell stories about this man.
They love him.
Oh my word. Talk about taking a bullet for somebody. I think they would do that for him. So let's talk about, let's segue now into that, connect to Tony Dungy and football players and what it means to be leaders in that kind of venue, and then ask the question, okay, would a Tobias Leadership Center fellow gain something like that? What would be the kind of likeness that you would see that would cross over in terms of a humble, quiet spirit? How do you teach that?
How do we teach that? That's a great question. I think for most people, they're either born with it or I think Christ, and I know not everyone would agree with this, but I think that Christ infuses people's hearts. So I'll give you an example. In my cohort, back in 2010, there was a guy named Kenyon Ingram who he worked for Eli Lilly. He was an HR director, human resources director, gentle, kind, just treated everyone with respect. Today, he's, I think I'm going to get this title right, but the global head of HR strategy. at Eli Lilly and Company. And so he just kept getting promoted and promoted. He was on the high potential list. He was a high pot as I started in corporate America at Cummins. That's what we call it, high pots, high potential folks. But you talk about someone who just had a heart for people, knew how to speak with people, knew how to listen. And you know, I'm not giving any secrets away when I say that he's a believer. But I look at someone like that just with great admiration, and he's still the same person today, irrespective of how high he's grown in one of the biggest corporations in the country. He is the same person today.
Isn't that the thing, though? When you see a leader who doesn't change when they get these positions. I was on social media with a friend who was interacting with me about something that I had put up. I think it had to do with the exorbitant salaries the CEOs get and that kind of thing. And he was talking about the person who I won't name that was mentioned as probably the worst boss he'd ever had. And this person had died, and he was talking about what kind of culture he created. And so, and he's part of it, he said, was that as he gained more and more prominence and gained more and more companies, he became worse and worse as a person. How do you stop the flow of pride in leadership? I think that's the question that comes out of that for me.
I think it really is, and I don't want to give a cop-out answer, but I really think it's a God thing. You know, God resists the proud, gives grace to the humble, and it's a struggle. I think, and we all have our challenges spiritually, whatever they may be. You know, personally, I try to remember that I also have flaws, but I also love. There's a great Chinese proverb that says, "I have no friends, I have no enemies, I only have teachers." And so, as I look back, because I've had bosses like that, unfortunately and fortunately, those people taught me as much as the quote unquote good bosses, because they taught me how not to be. And so I've had people who are in my life very, very blessed, many mentors, some intentionally, some unintentionally. But I've learned a great deal in all of those situations, and I try to take the best of what I've learned and apply it in my own work, career and life.
Just as a point of reference to who you are as a person, you said something off air I just wanted to quickly touch on. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I wanted to ask you about your love for apologetics.
Yes.
Why is that?
Well, you know, 1 Peter 3:15, right? Always be ready with an apologia, the Greek word, a defense, and answer back for the hope that lies in us. And so, you know, my grandmother, who's long deceased, my mother's mother, growing up, I mean, she was a wonderful person, very, very brilliant, A student, didn't have the opportunity to go to college. I'm a first generation college student. She would always call me, usually call me Mr. Smith. She would say, Mr. Smith, all you want to do is argue. All you want to do is argue. And I would say, no, Mama. Everyone called her Mama, including the neighborhood kids. But she was, of course, right. I did love to argue. But I took that and channeled that into something positive. I love the life of the mind. I love to debate. And so apologetics just fits right within that.
That concept of the life of the mind is a big deal for us as Christians. And honestly, we don't really think about it all that much unless we talk about college kinds of things. But nonetheless, it's a huge issue for us. I wasn't blowing smoke earlier. I really would love to have you come down to the class.
Absolutely.
And so hang on to that. We just got a couple minutes left. You tell us, if you were going to leave us with an idea, a thought, something that you think is essential for us to remember about the Tobias Leadership Center, what would you tell us?
I would say that we take people from all walks of life, that we take people who are extremely interested in self-improvement. You have to have a sense of humility. Now, you know, in some cases, I'm not saying it's never been the case that a boss didn't quote unquote force someone to go, but I also think that you can force a person's body, you can't force their mind or spirit. And so come to us in any way that we can help. By the way, the website is, if I may say, www.tobiascenter.iu.edu, tobiascenter.iu.edu. We're accepting applications right now for 2019. It's January through December. It's a year-long program. And applications will be available through October.
Wonderful. You've been listening to Larry Smith
from the Tobias Leadership Center here at IUPUI in Indianapolis, and we were pleased to have him on the show. And looking forward to hearing from him again, getting him in front of some of my students there at IUPUI. Looking forward to that. You've been listening to Dr. Clyde Posley, Dr. Mark Eckel. In our first hour, we talked about the biblical, theological, Christian base for how we think about leadership. Our second hour, Larry Smith has been here with us. Harold H.B. Bell has been our producer. He's the one who spins the cool jazz tunes that y'all hear. And they get cut out of the podcast, but you can watch them on YouTube Live. That's an important idea as well. Make sure that you touch base with HB at Radio Next, because the work he does here in the city is the kind of work that we need more and more of. What HB says is all community all the time. That's what he's been about for 7+ years. I always raved to everybody about what he does and who he is. We're right across the street from the Bonner Center. If you want to see some really good work going on in Indianapolis in the urban core, come down to 2131 East 10th Street at our studio, and then walk across the street to the Bonner Center. We're always glad to engage people from all walks of life. Thankful again for the opportunity to be with you here this week at the Comenius Institute-sponsored Warp and Woof radio show. Warp and Woof, vertical horizontal threads that make fabric. From a Christian point of view, we approach this from Colossians 1:17. By him, by Jesus, are all things held together. Next week, we will look forward to another great guest, but you've been listening to us this week talk about leadership, and we've been grateful to be with you. Thanks for sharing our time with us, and we'll talk to you then.
Thank you, brother.
Really, really, really appreciate it.
Good,
Thank
man.
you, Tyler.
It was solid content, man. And I can always tell when I have a guest on when it's just flowing, and it's cool. And that's with us.
Absolutely. Anytime, and would love to, to talk to your class and I've done that several times, talk to folks' class. I mean, any way I can be helpful.
Well, that kind of thing to say to people, look at the people we have here at IUPUI.
Yeah.
This is a fantastic university.
It really is. I mean, I think we talked about this when you were at my office, but just the distance that this university has traveled in the last 30 years, even the last 10 or 15 years, it's just remarkable. I'm just so proud of this institution.
Yeah. Well, I'm privileged to know you, honored to be in your presence. Honestly, the kinds of things that you're doing are straight up just wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll let you go.
Okay.
You got places to be, people to see.
Yeah, I'm just gonna grab a quick bite and then head right back to the office. And having been out here, I apologize for not getting back to you. It's been a whirlwind.
It's all right.
I'm getting caught up on email messages and meetings and so on.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Until next time.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you again next week. Yeah, exactly.